Hey Flim fans, welcome to CinePro, your ultimate hub for all movie recaps. From heartwarming classics to the latest blockbusters. In the future, the United States of America was destroyed by a severe drought, and people became willing to kill for water. Most of the population left the country, but the Holm family stayed because the father, Ernest, was convinced that crops could grow again even without water. Ernest remembered when the land was green, but his son Jerome did not. One day, two thieves tried to break into a small building on Ernest's farm by burning the lock. Ernest caught them in the act and fired at them, killing one of the thieves instantly. The other begged for mercy, explaining that someone told him there was water in the building. He also claimed he wanted to go to the bathroom and reached into his pocket, but Ernest saw the gun and fired first. Jerome witnessed everything from afar and offered to help his father, but Ernest only told him to call him Dad instead of his first name. Later, Ernest opened the small building, which turned out to be a well. Unfortunately, the well was dry. Ernest had to push the donkey to continue the journey without water. The two of them continued on and encountered the Watermen, a group of people monopolizing water distribution extracted from deep wells through a deal with the government. Ernest traded them goods and food in exchange for water. Jerome thought it was best never to upset these men, as they were more dangerous than they seemed. They took the water and left them alone. Ernest also kept trying to convince them to supply water to his farm, but the Watermen demanded large sums of money. On the way back, the donkey fell and was severely injured. As the donkey groaned in pain, Ernest shot it to end its suffering. Jerome cried but swore he would have done the same if necessary. When they returned to the farm, Ernest's daughter Mary prepared food for them and washed the dishes using dirt. Ernest listened to the radio while Jerome drew animals, their only hobby. Later, Ernest heard a noise and went outside to find that Mary had escaped through the window to meet her secret lover. The next day, Jerome and Ernest went to Sam's auction house to bid on a robot known as Simulant Shadow, or Sim, to replace Sam's donkey, named Flim. They competed with Flim in the auction, who bid against them until the last moment. Ernest won the auction, but his debts increased significantly. Afterward, they visited Catherine, Ernest's wife and the children's mother, who could not walk due to an accident. The hospital had a special machine connected to her via wires to help her walk. The only way the family could bring Catherine home was by purchasing the expensive machine. After spending some time with Catherine, the two returned home. On the way, they saw Ruby and Suzu with a baby. They considered them to be people exploiting their children to gain sympathy and money. Ernest avoided them, but later returned to give them water. The couple had been contemplating selling the baby because they couldn't afford to raise it. Ernest advised them against it and promised to help them with water. Flim later came to the farm, revealing himself as Mary's secret lover. He asked to borrow Sam's robot and promised to pay rent, but Ernest refused unless Sam's father signed a paper. Flim was upset by this request and told Ernest he would never succeed in irrigating the land before leaving. Later, Jerome and Ernest met the Watermen, who helped the robot Sam perform well. Ernest began convincing them to consider a deal to lay a water pipeline to his farm. He then started digging to uncover the old pump for inspection. While working, he advised Jerome to go out, meet girls, or at least make friends. However, Jerome preferred to focus on his family. On their way home, they saw Flim speeding away. At the farm, Mary washed clothes by putting detergent in the vacuum cleaner. Ernest arrived and forbade her from going out again, which angered Mary. She declared she was old enough to do whatever she wanted. When Ernest swore he only wanted to protect her, Mary told him she hated him and loved Flim. She tried to escape but collided with Jerome and asked him for money. This gave Ernest enough time to catch and stop her. Mary cried, accusing Ernest of failing to protect the family. He locked her in her room and broke her window. Later, Ernest and Jerome woke up to find Sim had been stolen. Ernest assumed Flim was responsible and went to his house, only to learn from Sam that Flim had left the area in the morning, heading to the mountains. It was revealed that the farm originally belonged to Sam, and that Flim was obsessed with the land he had lost, even though Sam believed it was unsuitable for farming and that water wouldn't help. Ernest went to the mountains to investigate but was struck on the head and lost consciousness. At night, Ernest woke up at the Watermen's camp where they accused him of stealing their equipment using Sim. Ernest denied it, but their leader, Caleb, beat him. A fight broke out, and things escalated until Ernest stole Caleb's knife, grabbed a rifle, and fired into the air to disperse the crowd. He ran away, with Caleb continuing to threaten him. On his way home, Ernest found Flim sleeping by a fire with Sim nearby. Flim had stolen the car and equipment to frame Ernest. Ernest waited until morning, woke Flim with a gun pointed at him, and tied him to Sim, who carried the equipment. They walked under the scorching sun to find the watermen. Flim provoked Ernest by talking about Mary, causing Ernest to shove him to the ground as punishment. Eventually, both became extremely thirsty. Flim convinced Ernest to stop so they could drink, but the equipment contained alcohol instead of water. Ernest began consuming the alcohol, being an addict, while Flim pretended to drink. Flim revealed that Caleb wanted Ernest dead, so he stole the car to survive. He tried to give Ernest money, but Ernest refused, suspecting the story. When Ernest tried to move, the alcohol made him dizzy and unable to walk. This was Flim's plan all along. He took the opportunity to hit Ernest with a rock, causing him to fall and hit his head on the stones. As Ernest bled and lost consciousness, he recalled Catherine's accident and what had happened. Due to his drinking habits, after a while when Ernest wakes up, he finds himself tied up in Sim. In a state of alcohol-induced delirium, he screams like a madman. Later, he goes to the farm, and Mary joins him to escape together. Jerome becomes worried about Ernest and decides to search for him. When night falls, he finds Sim at the camp of the watermen. They tell him that his father died in a car accident. When the time for the funeral comes, Mary returns. The siblings cry together. They also visit their mother to tell her the bad news. The Flim takes them in the car, saying he'll take them back home, but Jerome refuses and prefers to walk. Jerome stops the car and asks them about Ernest. Jerome tells him he is dead and warns him to stay away from them. The Flim says he wants to help them, but Jerome drives him away. At the farm, Jerome begins to beat Sim severely out of anger. The Flim intervenes to stop him, explaining that grief is difficult, but that he can't ruin their source of income. He promises to help the family. He also shocks Jerome by telling him that Mary is pregnant. The Flim has big plans for the farm, and Jerome agrees to try. In the afternoon, the Flim brings equipment for the watermen and asks Caleb to install a water pipe on the farm. At first, Caleb refuses, but the Flim suddenly holds him responsible for Ernest's death because Caleb's gun and knife were found with the body. Out of fear of the consequences, Caleb immediately agrees to install the water pipe on the family's land. A few days later, the new entrance is officially installed, and Flim works hard all day to plant and grow the wheat, which is irrigated with sprinklers. The family can now enjoy a real shower. A few weeks later, Jerome is surprised to find a small note on the ground. In the end, the land is covered with beautiful plants to celebrate. The Flim and Mary decide to get officially married and tattoo each other during the ceremony. The Flim drinks and can't stop thinking about Ernest's death. A few days pass, and Sam comes to the farm with 2 people from the bank. It turns out Ernest had significant debts, and they want Flim to pay them. Flim takes the horses in his cart to appear tough. Sam hits him and explains that no one ever wanted to buy the land. Ernest only had it because he never left. But thanks to the water and crops, the bank can now sell it. So Flim must pay up if he doesn't want to lose it. At night, the Flim puts Sim in his car and takes Ruby with a baby, claiming they're going to check prices just to get an idea. Flim sells the baby against Ruby's will. Ruby panics and begs to return the baby. The buyers shoot and kill Ruby. They try to shoot Flim too, but he fires back while escaping, leaving the car behind. Sim is injured in the shooting, and the damage causes her to revert to her original factory setting. The next day, Flim pays the bank with the baby money, but tells the siblings he sold Sim to Ruby. At that time, Sim arrives in the city and is discovered by the people who made her. Calvin finds the owner's information and contacts the farm. Jerome answers the phone and becomes suspicious, rushing to the local market. He finds the Flim talking to Suze, who is holding a doll and claiming it's her baby. Noticing this, Jerome tries to talk to them, but Flim quickly takes Suze away. Later at the farm, Jerome asks Flim about Ruby, but Flim tells him Ruby took Sim and left. Jerome is determined to uncover the truth and announces he will visit his mother. However, he takes a bus to the border. The guards don't let him cross because he is a minor without a guardian. At that moment, Anna approaches him and offers to help him cross for a fee. Jerome agrees, and Anna puts him in a truck full of chickens. Within a few hours, the truck reaches the city. Jerome sees it for the first time and returns with Anna, who takes him to the factory but only takes half the money, explaining that the trip was a trick and he doesn't need a guide to return because no one will stop him. Before leaving, Jerome asks her if she met someone named Ernest, but Anna doesn't remember the name. Later, Jerome meets Calvin, who explains all the functions of the device. It turns out Sim's cameras were designed to capture the slope for reforestation and record everything Sim sees. Calvin teaches Jerome how to use it and leaves him alone. Jerome feels overwhelmed when he sees his father again. But this turns to horror when he discovers that Flim killed Ernest. It turns out Flim tied Ernest to the car and sent it toward the watermen's camp, making it look like Sim lost control and accidentally dragged Ernest to his death. Jerome feels devastated in the office. At night, rain begins to fall on the farm for the first time in over 10 years. Jerome quickly returns and tries to act nonchalant, asking Flim how he got Sim back. Flim is confused and checks the barn, shocked to find Sim standing there unharmed. He says Ruby must have returned her out of guilt. A few days later, Jerome visited Catherine and promised to take care of her as Ernest did. One day, the Flim and Jerome were hunting to keep animals away from the crops. Flim failed all his shots and handed the gun to Jerome, blaming the weapon for being faulty to hide his failure. Jerome had a strong urge to shoot the Flim, but instead killed a deer, proving the issue was with Flim's aim. When they returned home, Jerome hid the gun in his room. At dinner, Jerome mentioned receiving a call from Ruby and looking for Flim. This provoked Flim, and he reacted angrily, accusing Jerome of lying. Mary scolded Flim for his behavior, and Jerome insisted he was telling the truth. Flim stormed out of the room in anger. The next day, Flim received a letter from Ruby, but it was actually from Jerome. The letter contained a request for Flim to meet Ruby about a problem. Before leaving, Flim searched for the gun, and Jerome told him he took it for repairs because Flim had said it wasn't working well. Flim had to act normal to avoid suspicion and apologized for his outburst at the table. Flim, after taking a knife, went to the rocks with Sim and called for Ruby. Suddenly, he fell into a hidden pit and broke his leg. Flim screamed in pain and asked Sim for help, but the machine was unable to understand. At that moment, Jerome appeared, holding a stone in his hand, making Flim realize the boy knew the truth. Desperate, Flim begged Jerome for mercy, but Jerome ignored him and walked away, leaving him to suffer under the scorching sun. Eventually, Flim began screaming again, calling for Jerome and asking him to think of his sister and the baby. He talked a lot about accidents and regret, which made Jerome so angry that he shot the Flim and killed him. And when Jerome returned home, he made Mary think that it was Flim that left her and didn't tell her how Ernest actually died. With the money from the crops afterward, they were able to get themselves real food. The siblings agreed to buy their mother's machine from the hospital so Catherine could live with them. Jerome then deleted all the videos from the robot Sim to start their lives anew. And that's the end of the movie. See you in a new summary, and thank you for watching.